Welcome to Terrified Tales, where things are about to get unsettling. Before we dive deeper into the darkness, make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you brave enough to be here at night? Now, relax and let the fear take hold. Story 1. The storm hit without warning, turning the once peaceful mountain landscape into a chaotic blur of rain and wind. Sarah squinted against the torrential downpour, trying to make out the trail in front of her. But all she could see was an endless wall of grey. The group had been hiking for hours, expecting the storm to pass quickly, but it had only grown worse, as if the mountains themselves were swallowing them whole. Are we lost? Mark's voice cut through the sound of the storm, his usually carefree tone tinged with something that wasn't quite fear, but close enough to make Sarah uneasy. He had always prided himself on being the bold one, the one who led the pack through rough terrain with a sense of invincibility. Yet now he was squinting ahead, his expression growing more uncertain by the second. "I think so," Sarah replied, her voice steady, but with a hint of worry. She had been trying to stay calm for the group, but the truth was she was scared. The storm was relentless, and the heavy rain was making the trail nearly impossible to follow. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing, bending the branches in unnatural ways. There was no sign of civilization anywhere, just the wild, unforgiving wilderness. "We need shelter," Olivia spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "We can't keep going like this. We'll never make it back to the campsite in this weather." Ben, the group's unofficial leader, nodded in agreement. He had been trying to stay composed, but it was becoming increasingly clear that they were in real danger. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and the thought of being stuck out here all night was becoming more terrifying by the minute. Up, ahead, through the downpour, something caught Sarah's eye, a dark shape against the swirling grey. She blinked, unsure if she had seen it correctly. The rain made everything look distorted, but there it was again, unmistakable. An old lodge, its weathered stone walls standing defiantly against the storm. It seemed out of place, almost as if it had been there for centuries, abandoned and forgotten by the world. "Look," Sarah pointed, her voice laced with hope. "A building. We might be able to take shelter there." Without hesitation, the group began moving toward it, their tired legs pushing through the mud, the wind howling in their faces. The closer they got, the more imposing the lodge appeared, its grand, faded architecture looming out of the mist, like something out of a nightmare. The windows were dark, as if no one had lived there for years. But the door, an old wooden structure, stood slightly ajar, creaking in the wind, inviting them in. "This place is ancient," Ben muttered, his voice filled with awe, though there was a note of caution in it too. "Are you sure we should go in? It doesn't exactly look safe." "I don't care," Mark said, his tone shifting from uncertainty to determination. "We're freezing out here. Let's just get inside." Sarah hesitated. There was something unsettling about the way the lodge stood there, isolated and forgotten, as if it had been waiting for them. But the storm was growing worse, and they didn't have much of a choice. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm. They stepped inside the lodge, the creaking door groaning as it swung open. The smell hit them first, a thick, musty scent of mildew and decay. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of years of neglect. The floorboards beneath their feet groaned in protest as they entered, each step disturbing the silence that seemed to hang in the air. The grand foyer was dimly lit by a few flickering candles on a dusty table. The walls were adorned with faded portraits, their eyes watching the group as they moved past, their faces frozen in time. The furniture, draped in old sheets, looked like it had been abandoned decades ago. "This place is creepy," Olivia whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the eerie surroundings. She wasn't one to scare easily, but something about the atmosphere of the lodge felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. Ben turned to them, his expression trying to stay calm, but even he couldn't hide the unease in his eyes. "We'll stay here for the night and then head back in the morning. It's too dangerous to keep going in this weather." They nodded, relieved that they had at least found shelter. But as the wind howled outside, a heavy silence fell over the group. Each of them seemed lost in their own thoughts, the oppressive atmosphere of the lodge settling over them like a weight. As the group settled in, they began to explore the house, trying to find something to occupy their minds. The lodge was vast, filled with rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. The further they ventured, the more the place felt like a maze, long hallways, winding stairs, and rooms that all seemed to look the same. It felt as though the house was shifting around them, pulling them deeper into its embrace. The storm outside continued to rage, the rain now beating against the windows in relentless sheets. The sound was deafening, yet somehow, the silence inside the lodge was even more unnerving. They couldn't help but feel as though they were being watched. "I'm going to check out the kitchen," Mark said, breaking the silence. "Maybe there's something to eat in here." "Be careful," Sarah warned. But Mark was already heading off toward the back of the house. The rest of them stayed in the foyer, unsure of what to do next. It was Olivia who first noticed it, the "oh" sound. At first, it was barely perceptible, a faint scratching noise, like the sound of nails dragging across wood. She froze, her body tense as the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It was coming from upstairs. I heard something," Olivia said, her voice trembling. She looked at the others, but none of them seemed to hear it. Or maybe they were just too scared to admit it. "Olivia, it's probably just the wind," Ben said, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. He was trying to convince himself as much as her, but Olivia shook her head. "No, it's not the wind." Suddenly, a door creaked open from the second floor. All of them froze, the hair on the back of their necks standing on end. No one had moved. None of them had touched a thing. "Is someone up there?" Mark called from the kitchen, but his voice was distant, almost too quiet. He didn't seem to hear what the others had. Then, as if in response, the footsteps began. Slow, heavy, like someone, or something, was walking down the hallway above them. The group stared at each other, silent, unsure of what to do. And then, with a sudden lurch of fear, Sarah turned to look at the door that had creaked open. It was standing wide, the hinges groaning under the pressure. Something, or someone, was waiting for them in the shadows of the lodge. The creaking of the door still echoed in Sarah's ears, reverberating through the cold, still air of the lodge. The group stood motionless in the foyer, unable to shake the feeling that the lodge was not quite as abandoned as it seemed. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, but inside was unnervingly quiet. "Did anyone else hear that?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked around the foyer as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows. The uncertainty in her eyes was palpable. Ben cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "It's probably just the wind. This place is old. The storm's making the building settle. We've got enough space here to wait it out." Mark, still in the back, calling from the kitchen, seemed less bothered by the strange atmosphere. "I'll be right back with some snacks. You guys are getting paranoid. It's just a creepy old house." But even as Mark spoke, there was a subtle tremor in his voice. He didn't realize it, but his words seemed to only amplify the disquiet creeping into their hearts. Sarah felt her stomach twist, an uneasy feeling gnawing at her insides. There was something about this place, something that was more than just the storm. Olivia shifted on her feet, her gaze drifting toward the hallway at the far end of the room. "I think we should stick together. Let's stay in the foyer until we figure out what's going on." Sarah nodded in agreement, not wanting to show how much the odd occurrences had unnerved her. But the thought of wandering further into the lodge was almost as unsettling as the storm outside. The air seemed to pulse with an unseen presence, and the silence was deafening. "Okay," Ben said, though his voice faltered slightly. "Let's wait here. We don't need to go exploring just yet. We're safe for now." They huddled together in the foyer, the cold creeping in through the cracked windows. As Sarah watched, Olivia's eyes darted around the room, her face pale and drawn, as if she could sense something the others couldn't. There was a flicker of motion, a shadow, no, more like a shifting presence in the corner of the room. "You see that?" Olivia asked, her voice cracking. Before anyone could respond, the sound of footsteps came again, this time much closer, the floorboards groaning under the weight of each slow, deliberate step. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The footsteps were in the hallway just behind them. They weren't the distant, muffled sounds from upstairs. These were the sound of someone walking toward them, and the sound was unmistakably human. "Who's up there?" Sarah called out, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an answer. For a moment, the footsteps stopped. "Mark," Ben called, his voice laced with tension. "Is that you?" There was no response. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating, broken only by the howling wind outside. Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine, her fingers tightening on the back of the old wooden chair beside her. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone in the lodge, that whatever had been waiting for them earlier was still out there, watching. The oppressive silence in the room deepened, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting to reveal itself. A door upstairs creaked open, and the unmistakable sound of dragging footsteps filled the air, dragging slowly, deliberately, as though someone were pacing back and forth. Olivia stepped forward, her body tense, and whispered, "We need to go, now." But Sarah didn't move. She was frozen, a part of her wanting to flee, but another part, some dark, curious part, compelled her to stay. The curiosity gnawed at her, urging her to understand what was happening, to make sense of the bizarre events. But something in the back of her mind told her that understanding might be the worst thing they could do. Ben was the first to make a decision, though it was clear he was struggling with the uncertainty gnawing at him. "I'll go check it out. Stay here. If it's nothing, we'll just keep to ourselves and wait for the storm to pass." "No," Olivia protested, her voice sharp. "We shouldn't split up. We don't know what we're dealing with." Sarah, now clutching her jacket tightly around her, could feel the weight of the air in the room, the thick, oppressive feeling that seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. She knew deep down that if they stayed, they would have to face whatever was stalking them, and no one knew what it wanted, or what would happen if they didn't. Before anyone could argue further, a shrill, piercing scream echoed from somewhere deep within the lodge, cutting through the silence like a knife. It was Mark. "Mark!" Ben shouted, panic creeping into his voice as he rushed toward the source of the scream. "Ben, wait!" Sarah shouted, but he was already gone, disappearing down the dark hallway toward the back of the house. Olivia gripped Sarah's arm, her face pale and frantic. "We need to stick together. Don't go after him alone." But it was too late. Ben had already vanished into the darkness. A terrible crash echoed from the direction of the kitchen, followed by a long, agonized groan of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. Silence fell once more. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and Olivia trembled beside her. The air felt impossibly thick, the walls pressing in from all sides. The storm outside, once fierce and howling, seemed to fade into the background, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What had just happened? Had Mark really screamed? Was Ben still alive? And what in the world was making that noise? She couldn't answer any of these questions, but she knew that whatever was in this house was not something they could fight. They needed to leave, but it was too late for that now. The door at the end of the hall creaked open again, and a figure appeared in the doorway, a pale silhouette standing motionless. For a moment, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Then, it stepped forward. The figure in the doorway seemed to shift and change as it moved toward them, and Sarah's mind raced to comprehend what she was seeing. Was it one of their own, or something else entirely? The house was alive with terror, and the clock was ticking. Could they escape, or would they too become part of the lodge's dark history? The figure in the doorway moved toward them, its silhouette barely discernible in the dim light. It was tall, taller than any of them, and its body was obscured in shadow, making it impossible to discern any detail. Sarah's heart raced in her chest, the fear climbing into her throat. The air in the lodge seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides, suffocating her with the weight of something ancient and malevolent. Olivia, trembling beside her, reached for Sarah's hand, her skin ice cold and her breath shallow. "This isn't real," she whispered, but her voice was barely audible, as though she too were trying to convince herself. The figure took another step forward, its footfalls silent on the creaking floorboards. Each step it took felt like an eternity. The silence in the lodge had deepened, so absolute that it felt like the entire world had been suspended in time. Then it spoke. "Leave or join us." The voice was low, grating, as if it came from somewhere far beneath the ground, a voice that seemed to resonate within the walls themselves. It wasn't a human voice. It couldn't be, but it was unmistakably intelligible. The words hung in the air, chilling and suffocating, and as they settled over Sarah, she felt a cold dread crawl beneath her skin, spreading outward from her heart. Who are you?" Sarah managed to choke out, her voice trembling, her throat dry. The figure didn't answer, but it took another step closer. The shadows around it seemed to warp and twist, growing darker with every movement. For a fleeting moment, Sarah thought she saw a glimpse of a face. A pale, gaunt face, with hollow eyes and a mouth that moved in a soundless whisper. But then the figure was only shadow again, blending seamlessly with the darkness around it. Olivia squeezed Sarah's hand harder. "We need to get out of here," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. But Sarah couldn't move. Some force was keeping her in place. It was like the house itself was preventing her from leaving, as if the very walls of the lodge were reaching out to trap them. "Ben!" Mark's voice rang out from the other end of the hall. "Ben, where are you?" Sarah's breath caught. Mark, he had been in the kitchen when all this began. Where was he now? Had he seen? The figure too? Was he in danger? "Mark!" Sarah shouted back, her voice breaking. "Mark, get back here!" There was no reply. The figure in the doorway took another step forward, and the air around it grew colder. The temperature in the room dropped so rapidly that Sarah could see her breath, rising in thin, misty clouds. Olivia shivered uncontrollably beside her, and Sarah felt her own body tremble with the cold, her bones aching. "Why are you doing this?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. "What do you want from us?" The figure's head tilted slightly, as though considering her question. It took another step forward, its presence filling the room like a suffocating fog. Then it spoke again, the words slow and deliberate. "You belong to this place now. You will stay, or you will join the others." The words didn't make sense to Sarah at first, but as they lingered in the air, a horrible realization began to creep over her. The others. The ones who had come before them. The ones who had disappeared. "We need to leave," Olivia repeated. But it was no longer a plea. It was a desperate command. But the house had other plans. A loud crash came from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, scraping across the wooden floor, dragging something heavy. The noise was deafening, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. It wasn't just the storm outside, it wasn't just the figure standing before them. The house itself was alive with malevolent intent. The figure turned slowly, as if sensing that they were trying to escape. It didn't move quickly, but it didn't need to. It was already blocking their path to the door. And then, from the darkness behind the figure, something else emerged. A shadow, this time smaller, but no less terrifying. It was human-shaped, but its limbs seemed elongated, distorting and bending in unnatural angles. It wasn't a person. It couldn't be. Its eyes were wide and empty, like black pits of nothingness, staring through them. It crawled forward on all fours, its fingers scraping against the floor with a sound that made Sarah's stomach churn. The second figure moved closer, its breath ragged and shallow. Its mouth opened in a grotesque grin, too wide to be human, revealing rows of sharp, broken teeth. Sarah stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest. "What is this?" she gasped. The original figure did not move, but it didn't need to. The second figure, this twisted, crawling thing, was closing in on them slowly, but inexorably. "Mark." Ben's voice called again, sounding faint, distant. "Where are you?" Sarah's mind raced. The house, the spirits, the figures, they were all connected. The lodge wasn't just a place, it was a prison, a tomb, and the souls trapped here were as restless as the storm outside. And now they were part of it, whether they wanted to be or not. Another crash came from above, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open. The figure that had spoken to them seemed to flinch, its head turning slightly toward the noise. The house itself was alive, resonating with every breath, every movement. Suddenly, the door to the foyer slammed shut. Mark's voice was gone. Olivia screamed, and then, in the distance, from somewhere deep within the lodge, Sarah heard a child's laugh. A soft, distant sound that echoed through the walls. The child's laugh sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. The house had been waiting for them, and now they were not just trapped. They were becoming part of its dark history. But where was Mark? What had happened to him, and who or what was waiting for them in the shadows? The child's laugh lingered in the air, an eerie, hollow sound that seemed to reverberate through the walls. Sarah's blood ran cold as it echoed again, distant and unsettling. She turned to Olivia, whose face was pale and taut with fear, her eyes wide as she scanned the darkened corners of the lodge. "What was that?" Olivia whispered, her voice shaking, though her body remained rigid with fear. She gripped Sarah's arm tighter, her fingers digging into her skin. Sarah swallowed, hard, trying to steady her breathing, but her heart hammered in her chest. The laughter didn't feel like it belonged to a living child. It felt wrong, distorted, as though it came from a place beyond time, beyond reason. A sound that was meant to torment, to freeze them in place. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice barely a breath. She tried to force herself to look around, to push the growing panic aside, but the lodge seemed to be alive with an oppressive presence. The shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally, twisting like tendrils reaching. For them, the floor beneath them creaked, as if the house were shifting in response to their every movement. They needed to find Mark. They needed to find a way out. But as Sarah moved toward the door, it slammed shut with a force that made the entire house shudder. The force of the impact rattled the windows, and a cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of damp earth and mildew. The once faint smell of decay was now unmistakable, growing stronger by the minute, like the house itself was rotting from within. "No. No. No." Olivia gasped, her eyes wide with terror. She tried the door handle, yanking it furiously, but it wouldn't budge. It's locked. We're trapped. The shadows on the walls seemed to grow, pressing in on them from all sides. The air felt thick, oppressive, heavy with something ancient and angry. The walls creaked as if they were alive, shifting and groaning in protest. The sound of running water began to rise, a soft trickle at first, just a faint sound, like a leaky faucet somewhere in the distance. But then, as the seconds stretched on, it grew louder and louder. "Is that water?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking as she turned to Ben, who was still standing in the corner, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor beneath them. Then the floorboards shifted. The first drop of water fell onto the wooden floor with a soft, unsettling plink. It was cold, colder than the storm outside, and it was just the beginning. As the seconds ticked by, more drops began to fall, and then more. The water spread in a slow, steady stream, pooling at their feet. "It's flooding," Mark's voice echoed from the other side of the house. His voice sounded distorted, muffled, like it was coming from underwater. "Mark!" Ben shouted, but there was no response. Sarah's heart pounded harder as the water slowly spread across the room. The lodge seemed to tremble underfoot, and the strange whispers returned, swirling around them. They were growing louder now, and Sarah could hear faint voices mixed in with the sound of the water, speaking in words she couldn't understand. "Mark," she shouted again, her voice desperate. The water continued to rise, filling the corners of the room, creeping toward their ankles. It was freezing cold, and it seemed to carry with it something else, a creeping, unnatural chill that seeped into their bones. The air was thick with mildew and dampness, and the whispering voices, soft but insistent, filled her mind. A voice behind them, low and guttural, spoke again. "It begins." The figure from the hallway, the one that had stood in the doorway, was gone, but its presence still lingered in the shadows, and the house, the entire lodge, seemed to respond to the rising water. The walls creaked and groaned, the floorboards flexed as if under the weight of the flood, and the whispers, now louder, seemed to come from the very walls. This is insane." Mark's voice cracked as he stumbled into the room, drenched, his clothes heavy with water, his face was white with terror. "We need to get out, now." But as he stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind him, the heavy wooden panels shaking as though the house itself were refusing to let them leave. The water was now nearly up to their knees, and the temperature had dropped so drastically that Sarah's teeth began to chatter from the cold. "Why is it flooding?" Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper, her face pale with confusion and fear. "There's no storm outside anymore. It's impossible. This house, it doesn't make sense." "It's the curse," Ben muttered, his voice hoarse. "The house is alive. The storm was just the beginning. The flooding, it's part of it." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process everything. The house, the storm, the spirits. It all felt like one terrifying nightmare that was growing more real with every passing second. But how was she supposed to fight something like this? How could they possibly escape? Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room, and the floor beneath them shifted. The water began to swirl, as if something deep within the lodge was pulling it down into the earth. The water level continued to rise, and Sarah's feet began to feel like they were sinking. "Into the floor. We need to move," Mark shouted, grabbing Olivia by the arm. "We're not safe here. Come on." But it was too late. The water surged suddenly, sweeping them off their feet. The force of the flood was too strong, and Sarah felt herself being carried away by the current. Her heart pounded in her chest as the water closed over her head, swallowing her entire body. She fought to keep her head above the water, gasping for air, but it was like the house was consuming them, pulling them deeper into its endless, watery depths. A loud, horrifying shriek pierced the air, a shriek that didn't sound human. It was the same sound Sarah had heard earlier, the same echo of despair and anguish that seemed to come from the very walls. And then, as quickly as the flood had come, it stopped. The water, once surging and overwhelming, now settled into stillness, leaving the room eerily quiet. But they weren't alone. From the depths of the water, something else rose. A shadow, tall and grotesque, its limbs impossibly long and distorted. Its face, though hidden in darkness, seemed to leer at them, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The water receded, but what emerged from the depths was far worse than anything they could have imagined. The figure from the flood, taller, darker, and more monstrous, was now standing in the middle of the room, and it was coming for them. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay as the water slowly receded, leaving the group trembling in the eerie silence of the lodge. The monstrous figure that had emerged from the depths of the floodwater stood before them, a twisted, shadowy form with limbs that stretched unnaturally, like dark tendrils reaching toward them. It didn't move at first, but its presence was overwhelming. The air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, as if the very foundation of the house was alive and reacting to the dark entity standing before them. The figure's eyes gleamed, hollow and infinite, as though they could see straight through their souls. "What is that thing?" Mark gasped, his voice hoarse as he backed away slowly, his wet clothes clinging to his skin, his breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. "I don't know," Ben said, his voice trembling, "but it's not human." Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure, and every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to escape, to get out of the lodge before whatever this was consumed them. But her legs were frozen in place, her body rooted to the spot, as though the house itself was keeping her there. The figure shifted slowly, like smoke twisting in the air. As it moved, a low, guttural growl emanated from its chest, an unearthly sound that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the lodge. The ground beneath their feet trembled, a deep, unsettling vibration that made Sarah's teeth rattle in her skull. A moment later, the house itself seemed to react. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, and the distant whispers that had been haunting them all evening grew louder, more insistent. "Sarah." Olivia's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "Do you hear that? The whispers. They're louder." Sarah nodded, her gaze still fixed on the figure, though she could hear it now too, the whispers curling around them like a fog. There were too many voices, too many souls crying out in pain, their wails filling the room, their desperate cries growing in volume, but the words were incoherent, like the voices of the past that had never found peace. From the corner of her eye, Sarah saw movement. The portraits on the walls had changed. The eyes of the people in the paintings were no longer just watching. They were staring, their faces twisted in grotesque expressions of anguish. And then they blinked. The realization hit Sarah like a thunderclap. The lodge wasn't just haunted. It was alive with the souls of the dead, trapped within its walls, condemned to relive their torment forever. And now, they wanted something from her, something from all of them. They were part of the house now, just like the ones who had come before. Ben's voice was strained as he took a step toward the doorway. "We need to get out. We need to find a way to..." Before he could finish his sentence, the doors to the lodge slammed shut with an earth-shattering bang. The windows rattled as if the house itself was trying to keep them in, to trap them in its dark grip. "No!" Mark screamed, rushing to the door and pounding against it with all his strength. "Let us out, please!" But it was no use. The door remained immovable, as if it had become part of the wall itself. The whispers grew louder, closer, as if the very walls were closing in on them. Then, the figure that had emerged from the water spoke again. Its voice was not a voice at all. It was a presence, an overwhelming weight pressing down on their minds. "You are ours now. You will stay, or you will join us." A terrible silence followed. For a moment, Sarah thought the world had stopped moving altogether. The house, the figure, the whispers. It was all one suffocating force. But then the house shifted. The floor beneath them groaned and cracked. The walls twisted, contorting as though the house itself were rearranging, folding in on itself. The once grand, empty halls now felt like a maze, each turn leading them deeper into the unknown. The very architecture seemed to shift and bend, like the house was alive, and it was trying to trap them in its labyrinthine grasp. From somewhere above, a door slammed open. Footsteps, heavy, slow, began to descend the staircase. But these footsteps were different. They weren't made by the shadowy figure in front of them. They were the footsteps of someone, or something alive. "Mark," Ben said, his voice hoarse with fear. "Stay close. We need to stick together." Mark didn't answer. He was staring at the staircase, his eyes wide with terror. The footsteps grew louder, closer. It was as if the entire lodge was closing in on them, the very sound of the storm outside swallowed by the crushing weight of the house's presence. Suddenly the staircase creaked, and a figure appeared at the top. A woman, her hair wild and untamed, her clothes drenched in something dark and sticky. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated in terror as she looked down at them. Her face twisted into a grimace of pain. I didn't... She began, her voice hoarse and ragged. She didn't seem to be speaking to them. She was speaking to herself, as if trapped in some memory. I didn't know I was..." And then, as if the house itself was answering her, the shadows shifted again, and Sarah saw something in the doorway. A figure, pale and gaunt, reaching out toward the woman, with hands covered in dark, writhing marks. "No, not again," the woman screamed, her voice rising in pitch, panic overtaking her. Before Sarah could react, the figure lunged forward, its hands reaching for the woman, pulling her into the darkness. The room grew colder, the whispers overwhelming as the woman's. Cries echoed through the lodge, but the darkness didn't let her go. It consumed her. Then, just as quickly as it began, the room fell silent once more. The footsteps stopped. The woman was gone. The figure, the one that had first emerged from the flood, stood motionless, its eyes still locked on Sarah and the others. The whispers faded, but the presence of the spirits remained, hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. "You will join us," the voice said again, cold and unfeeling. "You will stay, or you will join us." The woman's disappearance, absorbed into the shadows by the haunting figure, leaves the group in a paralyzing state of terror. The echoes of the lodge's curse are now undeniable. They are not just trapped physically. They are becoming part of the house's dark, eternal history. What will happen next? Will they survive, or will they too vanish into the darkness? The room was deathly still after the woman's scream had faded into the darkness. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet as Sarah and the others stood frozen, the weight of the silence pressing down on them like a physical force. They hadn't moved, hadn't even dared to breathe too loudly. The only sounds now were their own shallow gasps, the distant sound of the storm still battering the lodge, and the whispering voices that swirled through the air, fading in and out like an eerie, never-ending hum. Ben, his face pale, was the first to speak. What just happened? Where did she go? What was that? Sarah's throat tightened as she tried to process the events. The woman, the figure who had appeared on the stairs, hadn't just disappeared. She had been pulled into the shadows, her final scream echoing in their minds. "That wasn't just a person," Olivia said quietly, her eyes wide with terror. She was already one of them. A spirit, a trapped soul like the others. Her voice cracked as she spoke. The words aloud, and Sarah could hear the fear in her tone. She had seen it too. The woman hadn't been alive. She was just another trapped soul, consumed by the darkness of the lodge. "We need to leave," Mark insisted, his voice breaking as he glanced toward the door. "Now, we can't stay here. It's not just a house, it's a tomb, a prison. And whatever it is, it wants us." But no one moved. The heavy silence of the lodge pressed on them, suffocating them. The weight of the house seemed to grow with every passing second. It wasn't just the storm outside. It wasn't just the shadows in the hallways. The very air in the room felt thick, as though it were full of the spirits that had been trapped here for so long, waiting to claim more souls. "I don't know if we can get out," Ben said, his voice quiet. He looked at the others, his expression hollow. "It's like the house knows we're here, and it doesn't want us to leave." Sarah shuddered, the same thought creeping into her mind. The house was more than just a structure. It was something alive. It had been built on cursed ground, on land that had witnessed countless tragedies, and it had fed on the people who had stayed there, feeding on their souls, trapping them forever. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, as if the walls were closing in around them. The very air seemed to pulse with an energy that was both foreign and ancient. The voices were no longer unintelligible murmurs. Now they were distinct, calling to them in an eerie chorus. Sarah could pick out fragments of words, names, cries, for help, pleas for release. It was as if the house itself was alive with the voices of the dead, the spirits of those who had never escaped. "They're here," Olivia whispered, her voice shaking with the weight of the realization. "All of them. The spirits. They're trapped, and they want us to join them." Sarah's blood ran cold as she turned to face her. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Olivia's face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "The house. It's not just a place. It's built on land cursed by an ancient ritual, a ritual that bound the spirits of those who died here. This place, it was meant to trap them. The spirits can't leave, and neither can we." Ben stepped forward, his face grim. "So we're trapped here, forever?" "No," Olivia replied, her voice trembling with urgency. "There's a way out. There's always a way out, but it's not easy." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do we have to do?" Olivia closed her eyes for a moment as though she were trying to piece together the fragments of her memories. "The ritual, the curse, it can be broken, but only if we destroy the heart of the house, the source of its power." "The heart?" Mark asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "You mean like an actual heart?" Olivia nodded. "Yes, a physical heart. The ritual to bind the spirits to the land required a human heart, sacrificed to ensure that the souls would remain trapped. That heart is the source of the curse. If we can find it and destroy it, the spirits will be freed, and we can escape." "But where is it?" Sarah asked, her pulse racing. "Where do we find it?" Olivia's gaze flickered toward the darkened hallways. "I don't know, but I feel it. It's somewhere in this house, somewhere deep within. The house itself will lead us to it, if we're brave enough to follow." The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though urging them on or warning them. Sarah felt a chill creep over her, but she knew there was no choice now. They couldn't just sit back and wait for the spirits to claim them. "We have to do it," Ben said, his voice firm now, though his hands were shaking. "We have no other choice." "Wait," Mark said, his voice faltering. "How do we destroy it? If we even find it, how can we possibly destroy something like that?" Olivia took a deep breath, her expression steely. It has to be destroyed with the blood of someone who hasn't been claimed by the curse. Someone who is still human. For a moment, the room fell silent. Sarah's stomach twisted as the weight of Olivia's words settled over her. To destroy the heart, someone would have to make the ultimate sacrifice. The only way out was through sacrifice. But who? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The house around them seemed to tremble, its very foundations groaning in response to the conversation. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the house was listening, waiting. A loud, unmistakable thud came from the floor above, followed by the sound of something or someone scraping across the wooden floor, dragging slowly as if in search of them. The whispering voices crescendoed into a roar, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Run!" Olivia said urgently. "We have to find the heart, now!" The footsteps grew closer, and the floor beneath their feet trembled as the house itself seemed to be reacting to their presence. The hunt was on. Would they be able to destroy the heart of the curse before the spirits claimed them? Or would they too become part of the lodge's dark history? The tension in the air was suffocating. Every breath Sarah took felt heavier. Every footstep reverberated in the eerie silence of the house. The walls around them groaned and creaked, the very foundations of the lodge seeming to shift in response to their every movement. They had no choice but to keep moving. "We need to find it," Olivia said urgently, her voice low, but filled with a sense of purpose. "The heart, it's somewhere deep within this house, and we don't have much time." Ben looked around, his face drawn, his eyes searching every dark corner, every shadow. What if it's too late? What if the spirits have already claimed it? Then, "We'll be trapped here forever," Mark muttered, his voice shaking. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door, as if expecting it to slam shut at any moment. "We need to find it now." The whispering voices seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as though the house itself was growing impatient with their indecision. The air felt charged, like a storm was brewing, only it wasn't outside. It was within the walls of the lodge, and it was closing in on them. The house wasn't just holding them here. It was watching them, guiding them toward their fate. Olivia moved forward, her hand brushing against the walls, her fingers trembling. "I can feel it. The closer we get, the stronger the pull. It's as if the house is alive, hunting us." As they ventured deeper into the lodge, the environment around them began to change. The hallways, once dusty and disheveled, now seemed unnaturally pristine. The faded wallpaper, the cracked portraits, everything looked new again. But in a way, that felt wrong, as though it were a twisted reflection of the past. The house was shifting, transforming before their eyes, warping to trap them in its dark embrace. Suddenly the air grew colder, a chill so intense it numbed Sarah's fingers and toes, making it harder to breathe. The temperature plummeted, as if the very soul of the house was freezing them in place. "It's getting worse," Mark said, his voice cracking. "We need to hurry." They reached the end of the hallway, where a grand staircase loomed before them. The stairs led upward into the blackness, but the cold air seemed to draw them in, as if beckoning them to ascend. But just as Sarah was about to step forward, a horrifying noise stopped her dead in her tracks, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "Something's here," Ben said, his voice steady but filled with fear. He looked toward the staircase, his eyes narrowing. "We have to go up." But as they stepped closer to the staircase, something caught Sarah's eye. The shadows along the walls twisted, shifting and moving like living creatures, their forms undulating and stretching in unnatural ways. The whispering voices grew louder, overlapping each other, until it was impossible to distinguish any one voice from another. Then the figure appeared again. It was the same figure they had seen before, The one that had first emerged from the floodwaters. But now it was different. Its form was more solid, more tangible. It was taller than before, its limbs twisted in grotesque angles, its face obscured by dark shadows. But its eyes, they were the same, hollow, infinite, and filled with an all-consuming hunger. It stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth, and as it did, the walls of the house seemed to ripple with a sickening sound, like the crack of bones being twisted out of shape. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step back, instinctively pulling Olivia with her. "It's here," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "It's coming for us." The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. The presence was enough to send waves of fear crashing over them. The temperature dropped further, and Sarah could see her breath clouding in front of her. Then something else happened. The walls, once warped and shifting, now seemed to pulse with energy. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Sarah felt the lodge itself breathing, as though it were alive with a dark, malevolent force. The figure extended its arm, its long fingers stretching toward them, its shadow twisting as it reached for them. "You will stay," it whispered. Its voice was barely audible, a cold, breathless hiss. "You belong to this place now." Before Sarah could react, the ground beneath them shifted. With a sudden jolt, the entire floor gave way, plunging them into a pit of darkness. For a split second, Sarah felt weightless, falling through the air as the ground fell away beneath her feet. But then, with a sickening thud, she hit the cold, damp earth below. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she quickly scrambled to her feet, gasping for air. The others were already standing, their faces pale with terror, their eyes wide as they surveyed their surroundings. They had fallen into the basement. It was dark, so dark that Sarah could barely see. The air was thick with dampness, and the scent of decay was overwhelming. The walls of the basement seemed to close in on them, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. And then, at the far end of the room, she saw it. The heart. It was encased in a dark, crystal-like substance, glowing faintly in the dim light. The blood-red light pulsed as though it had a life of its own, beating in rhythm with Sarah's own racing heart. The heart, the source of the curse, the thing that had bound the spirits to the land. It was more real than Sarah had ever imagined. "This is it," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with both awe and terror. "This is the heart of the house, the source of the curse." As they stepped closer, Sarah could feel the air growing thicker, the temperature plummeting even further. It was as if the heart was drawing all the life from the room, consuming the very essence of the lodge. "We have to destroy it," Ben said, his voice low but resolute. But as he stepped forward, a horrible screech pierced the air, a noise that sounded like the walls themselves were splitting open. The ground beneath them trembled again, and the heart began to glow brighter, pulsing with an unnatural energy. The figure from the shadows appeared again, its face now clear, twisted in a grotesque, malicious grin. It reached out, its fingers curling as it moved toward them. "You cannot escape," it whispered. "You belong to me, all of you." The heart pulsed, its energy growing stronger, and the figure advanced toward them. The group was now in the heart of the curse, but they had one last chance to destroy it. Could they destroy the heart before the spirit consumed them, or would they become trapped in the house forever? The room was growing colder with each passing second. Sarah could feel the temperature dropping even further as the pulsating glow from the heart intensified, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. The sound of the house creaking, groaning, as though it were alive, reverberated in her bones. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and a sense of wrongness permeated every inch of the room. The figure, now fully formed, stood just beyond the glowing heart. Its eyes, hollow and full of malevolent intent, were fixed on them as it stepped forward, its movements slow but deliberate. It smiled. No, grinned, its face twisting in a grotesque, horrifying expression. "You cannot destroy what is already yours," the figure hissed, its voice a harsh whisper that seemed to scrape against Sarah's mind. "The heart binds you all to this place, just as it has bound me." The shadow of the figure seemed to stretch toward them, its arms elongating, fingers curled into claws. Sarah felt a coldness seeping into her soul, a pressure mounting against her chest. The air around them became stifling, each breath harder to take, as if the house was feeding off their fear. "Mark," Olivia's voice trembled, and Sarah looked to see her friend's face pale with terror. "We have to destroy it. We can't let it consume us." But the figure's laugh echoed through the room, sharp and cruel. "You think you can break the curse? You are fools. You are part of this house now, just like the others. The memories of the woman, the one who had screamed before disappearing into the shadows, flashed in Sarah's mind. She had been swallowed by the darkness of the house, just as the countless others before them had been. She was part of the house now, one of the trapped souls that wandered its halls, forever tormented, forever seeking release. The whispers began again, but now they were clearer, louder. They weren't just echoes of the past anymore. They were voices, real voices. "I was the first," a voice whispered from the shadows. Sarah spun, but there was no one there. "The first to be trapped. I thought I could escape, but I was wrong. We are all wrong." The temperature continued to plummet, the room now so cold that Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs. And then a figure materialized from the shadows, a woman draped in tattered clothing, her face gaunt, her eyes wide with fear. She stepped forward, her hands outstretched, fingers clawing at the air. "Help me," the woman begged, her voice a tortured whisper. "You must help me. Destroy it before it takes you too." Sarah's pulse quickened. It was as though the house itself was bringing forward the spirits of the ones who had been lost to it, trapping them in an endless loop of terror. The woman's pleading face, her desperate, hollow eyes, seemed to mirror the torment that had been buried deep within the lodge for so long. But before Sarah could respond, the figure, the entity controlling the house, stepped forward, its presence so overwhelming that it swallowed up the room's dim light. "No one leaves," the entity said, its voice booming now, overpowering the whispers. "Not now, not ever. You are part of this place, and this place is part of you." The woman shrieked as the figure reached out with its twisted hands, its fingers closing around her, pulling her back into the darkness. "No!" Sarah cried, taking a step forward, but Olivia grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't get too close," Olivia gasped. "It's not real. It's part of the house's power. The spirits are trapped here, and if we're not careful, we'll become like them." Sarah shook her head, trying to force herself to focus. They had to destroy the heart. They had to find a way to break the curse before the house consumed them too. With trembling hands, she stepped closer to the heart, the pulsating red light, growing brighter, filling the room with an unnatural glow. The figure loomed over them, its presence so oppressive that Sarah felt as though her very soul was being pulled into the abyss. "We have no choice," Ben said, his voice firm despite the terror that clung to him. "We have to destroy it. Now." The figure's laugh echoed again, louder, like a wave crashing over them. "You cannot. I am the heart of this house, and you will join me, all of you." But Sarah could feel it now, the pull of the heart, the thrum of its power resonating in her chest. She knew what they had to do. There was no other way. They had to sever the bond, destroy the source of the curse. Olivia took a deep breath and stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, gleaming knife, a silver blade that glimmered in the blood-red light. It was their only weapon. She had been carrying it since they first entered the lodge, knowing somehow that it might come to this, a symbol of resistance. With trembling hands, Olivia moved closer to the heart, her eyes fixed on the glowing, pulsing orb of energy that was feeding off their fear. The shadows from the figure loomed larger now, reaching for her, but she didn't stop. "No," the figure growled, its voice an icy hiss. "You cannot destroy me. You cannot destroy what you have already become." Olivia plunged the knife into the heart. The effect was immediate. The room erupted in a deafening scream, an otherworldly, soul-shattering sound that made Sarah's chest constrict in terror. The walls of the house seemed to shake with the force of it, as if the entire lodge was trying to scream with the souls trapped within it. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, revealing deep fissures of darkness. For a moment, time seemed to stretch out, as if the world itself had stopped. The shadows, the whispers, the growling figure, all of it was suspended in a single terrifying instant. Then, the heart shattered. The pulse of light shattered like glass, splintering into 1,000 shards of glowing red energy. The air was filled with a sharp, stinging warmth, as the house itself seemed to bleed, the energy of the curse unraveling before their eyes. The figure shrieked, its form unraveling in the blinding light, its hollow eyes filled with fury and despair. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The darkness receded. The house groaned one final time, as if releasing a long-held breath. The walls trembled, the oppressive air lifting. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on them for so long seemed to dissipate, leaving behind only an eerie stillness. The heart has been destroyed, but at what cost? The curse may have been broken, but the spirits are not easily released. Sarah and the others stand in the aftermath, knowing that the lodge will never truly be free of the darkness that once consumed it. The final question remains, is it truly over, or is this just the beginning of another nightmare? The moment the heart shattered, the world seemed to stop. The air was heavy with the lingering remnants of its dark power, but the oppressive weight began to fade, replaced by a strange stillness. The house groaned. Its very foundations seemed to be shifting, bending under the weight of the curse that had finally been broken. For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. The room was filled with the sharp scent of burnt ozone, the glow of red light fading into nothingness. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere had lifted, but there was no immediate sense of relief. Her heart hammered in her chest, the adrenaline of the moment still coursing through her veins. What happened? Ben gasped, his voice trembling with exhaustion and disbelief. He wiped the sweat from his brow, eyes darting around the room, expecting something to leap out at them from the shadows. Olivia was the first to speak. Her voice was low but firm, despite the tremor in her hands. "I think we did it. I think we broke the curse." But even as she spoke the words, a chill ran through Sarah's spine. It wasn't over. She could feel it, the cold weight of something, still lingering in the air, something unfinished. The house shifted again. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly like a distant, fading heartbeat. The walls creaked in protest, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw a shadow flicker in the corner of her eye. She turned sharply, but there was nothing there. "No," Sarah whispered, stepping back instinctively. "It's not over." "You're right," Olivia agreed, her voice a whisper, almost drowned by the silence that had taken over the lodge. "It's too quiet. It's too calm." As if in response to Olivia's words, a distant, eerie sound echoed through the halls of the lodge. A soft, guttural hum that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The sound grew louder, rising from the depths of the house, reverberating through the entire structure until it was almost deafening. "Do you hear that?" Mark's voice cracked. His eyes were wide, scanning the shadows, searching for the source of the sound. "I hear it," Ben said, his voice tight with growing panic. He stepped backward, his feet shuffling against the floorboards as though preparing to run. But he couldn't escape. None of them could. Not yet. The hum became a low growl, a tremor deep within the earth that reverberated through Sarah's bones. The walls shuddered, as though something deep inside the house was awakening, something that had been locked away for years. Olivia's eyes widened. "The spirits, they're not gone." "No, they're not," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We only broke the heart. The curse, it was just the beginning." Ben looked at Sarah in disbelief. "What do you mean? We destroyed it. The heart was the source. If that's gone, then everything else should be..." "That was only one part of the curse," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising with panic. "The house itself, it's alive, Ben. The heart was just the anchor, the spirits, and they're still tied to the land. They're still here." The ground trembled again, more violently this time. The walls shook with the force of something angry, something desperate. The very foundations of the house seemed to throb, the darkness in the corners of the room swirling with a malevolent energy. "It's not over," Olivia said softly, her voice filled with dread. A chilling wind suddenly blew through the room, despite the windows being tightly shut. The gust seemed to originate from deep within the bowels of the house, pushing against them, whispering their names as it twisted around them. The whispers returned. This time, they weren't just the vague, indistinct murmurs they had heard before. They were clear, cutting through the air like daggers. "Join us." The words echoed in Sarah's mind, twisting her thoughts. She could feel them, the voices of the lost souls, trapped, tortured, never finding peace. "Stay with us." "No," Sarah cried out, shaking her head to clear the voices from her mind. "We have to leave. We have to escape." She turned toward the door, but the house had other plans. With a violent slam, the door flew shut, the air around them thickening again, growing suffocating. "Not again!" Mark shouted, rushing toward the door and trying to force it open. "We're so close. Please." But no matter how hard he pulled, the door wouldn't budge. The house was keeping them in, keeping them trapped. Suddenly, the house's groaning walls split open, revealing the stairwell that led to the basement, where the heart had been destroyed. But now there was something new, something wrong about it. From the darkness below, something was rising. A shape, darker than the rest, its form shifting with each passing moment. It was the entity, the one they had tried to destroy. But it wasn't just the figure they had seen before. This time, it was something more, something evolved. Its arms were stretched impossibly long, twisting and writhing as they reached upward. Its face was now visible, twisted, contorted, but familiar. The once shadowy figure now had eyes filled with a deep, haunting sorrow. "You cannot escape," it whispered, in a voice like 1,000 screams. It was no longer a force to fear. It was the vessel of the spirits, the source of their endless torment. It was the conduit through which they were bound, and now it was awake. The figure stepped forward into the light, its skin twisted with veins of black, its body a nightmare of flesh and shadow. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. It wasn't just the house, it was him, she whispered, her voice filled with terror. This is what kept them here. The entity was the curse. The heart was just the trigger. Olivia's face paled. But if it's alive, how do we stop it? Before anyone could answer, the air around them turned ice cold. The figure reached toward them, its twisted limbs reaching out, its fingers elongated into claws. "Stay with us," it whispered again, this time much louder, its voice reverberating through the house. "Join us, forever." The entity has fully manifested, its true form far more terrifying than they could have imagined. It isn't just the house that traps them, it's the curse itself, bound to the very spirit of the land. Will they find a way to destroy the source of the curse once and for all? Or will they become just another lost soul, trapped forever in the lodge's nightmarish grip? The air in the room was thick with tension, the whispers of 1,000 lost souls growing louder with each passing second. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she watched the twisted, contorted figure step forward into the dim light of the hallway. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It wasn't just an entity. It was the living, breathing embodiment of the curse that had shackled the house for so long. The figure's face was a grotesque mockery of a human form, its features stretched and contorted in ways that defied nature. Its eyes, those endless black pits, seemed to burn with a quiet, insidious fury. Every inch of its body trembled with the power of the spirits it commanded. "You cannot leave," it whispered, its voice, now a chorus of many voices all layered together, speaking in unison. "You are mine, all of you. You belong to this place now, just as they did." "No." Sarah's voice shook, but it was louder now, filled with defiance. "We've already broken the heart. The curse should be gone." The figure's mouth twisted into a sickening smile. "The curse was never just the heart. It was never just a thing. It is me. I am this house. I am the land. I am the blood of the past. The curse is not something you can destroy with a blade or a sacrifice. It lives in the souls of the lost. It lives in the memory of this place." The entity stepped closer, its limbs moving with unnatural fluidity, its fingers stretched like claws reaching toward them. "You belong to me now." Its voice grew deeper, more insistent. "Your souls will join the rest, forever trapped in the memory of this place." The walls seemed to shift and move, the very fabric of the house distorting, as if it were alive. The portraits on the wall shifted, their eyes following the group's every move, while the shadows seemed to crawl along the floor and ceiling, stretching out like dark tendrils. "This isn't real," Mark shouted, his voice rising in panic. He took a step back, his hands trembling. "We can't stay here. We can't be part of this." "We have to fight it," Ben said, his voice steady, though it was clear he was terrified. He looked at Olivia. "Do you have another plan?" "We can't let it win." Olivia hesitated, her eyes darting towards Sarah, as if she were trying to gauge if there was any hope left. "There might be one more way," she said slowly, "but it's not going to be easy, and we might not all survive it." Sarah's eyes widened as she took a step forward. "What do we have to do?" "There's a place in the basement," Olivia explained, her voice trembling but firm. The heart wasn't the only part of the ritual. The ritual bound the spirits to the land through a living sacrifice. But it was more than just the heart. The ritual requires a final offering, the soul of someone pure, someone unclaimed by the curse. Sarah's stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" Olivia looked grim. "One of us will have to stay behind. We have to bind the house again. The only way to truly break the curse is for someone to willingly offer their soul to it. They'll act as the final anchor. If we do this, the curse can finally be undone. If we don't..." Sarah's heart raced as the full weight of Olivia's words sank in. One of them had to stay. One of them had to die in order to destroy the entity. "No." Mark stepped forward, shaking his head. "You can't be serious. We're not sacrificing anyone else. We already lost people to this place. I'll do it." Sarah's voice was steady, though her insides were in turmoil. She stepped forward, locking eyes with each of her friends. "I'm the one who brought us here. If anyone is going to finish this, it has to be me." "Sarah, no," Olivia whispered, her face pale with fear. "We can't let you—" "I'm the one who has to," Sarah said firmly. "You all deserve to get out of here. You have to go." Ben looked like he was about to argue, but Sarah held up a hand, silencing him. The curse has been a part of me since I stepped through the door. I've been running from it ever since. If anyone can end it, it's me. With no other choice, the group fell silent, understanding that Sarah's decision was the only way to end the nightmare. "Please," Olivia whispered, stepping forward, "we'll do whatever we can to help." But Sarah shook her head. "This is the only way. The house won't let us go otherwise. I have to be the one to sever the tie, to release the spirits, to break the curse once and for all." Mark stepped up beside her, his eyes filled with tears. "Sarah!" "I'll be okay," Sarah said, her voice gentle. She turned toward the glowing, pulsating figure at the center of the room. The entity had stopped moving, watching them with a strange, knowing patience. She knew that once she offered herself to the house, the world would change forever. The spirits would be freed, the house would lose its power, and they would escape. With a final, trembling breath, Sarah closed her eyes and stepped toward the center of the room. The entity stirred, its form shifting, reaching for her. It knew what she was doing. The house had always known. "I offer myself," Sarah whispered, her words a prayer. "I give my soul to the house to break the curse." The house shook as though it were alive with the force of her words. The walls trembled violently, the light from the shattered heart flickering, and the shadows in the room seemed to howl. The very air itself seemed to collapse in on Sarah, pulling her into the darkness. And then, everything went still. The air was thick with silence, the tension too heavy to bear. Had Sarah's sacrifice been enough to break the curse? Was the entity truly gone, or had the house merely claimed another soul, adding it to its twisted collection of lost spirits? The world around them seemed to hold its breath. You're deep into the story now, and the horrors are only escalating. If you're still with us, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. Who else is staying up late to face this nightmare? Settle in. The terror continues. Story 2. The silence was deafening. After the explosion of energy from the heart, the house fell into an eerie stillness. The walls, once pulsing with dark energy, now stood quiet. The shadows that had lingered in every corner seemed to withdraw, vanishing into the recesses of the house as though they were never there at all. Sarah's sacrifice, the offering that she had made to break the curse, left an emotional void in the group. Her absence hung in the air like a thick fog. They could still feel her presence, her final words echoing in their minds. It was clear that the battle was won, but the cost was immense, and they weren't sure if the house's malevolent grip had been entirely broken, or if there were darker things still lurking beneath the surface. The group stood in the dim light of the hallway, unable to move at first. They had expected the world to change once the heart was destroyed, but what greeted them now was a quiet that was almost worse than the oppressive presence they had felt before. Ben's voice broke the silence first. "We need to go now." His words were shaky, but they were a catalyst that pushed the group into motion. Each of them knew they couldn't stay, even if they didn't fully understand what had just happened. They had to escape. Olivia, the most sensitive to the supernatural, stepped forward cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "This place, it doesn't feel right." Mark, his face pale and drawn, ran a shaky hand through his hair. "We broke the curse. We did what we had to do." He said it like a mantra, trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. But deep down, Sarah's sacrifice echoed in the pit of his stomach. They had won, but at what cost? The house still felt like it was alive. The air was heavy, filled with the remnants of dark magic, and the shadows seemed to creep back just out of sight. Sarah had given her life to sever the house's grip, to release the spirits, but the house itself had shifted in response. The energy was gone, but something had been left behind. Something unseen. "We need to go," Olivia repeated, her voice more urgent now. "Before we become part of it. Before we're trapped here too." Ben nodded grimly, stepping forward and leading the way. But as they moved, the house seemed to change around them. The walls stretched, expanding and contracting like the chest of a giant taking deep breaths. The hallways they had passed through before now twisted into unfamiliar shapes. It was as if the house had swallowed their memories of its layout, rewriting itself into an impenetrable maze. "God, it's like the house knows we're trying to leave," Mark muttered under his breath, his heart racing in his chest. The air grew colder, and the whispers that had been absent now started to return, soft, mournful murmurs that made Sarah's skin crawl. They seemed to swirl around them, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Sarah," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is that you?" For a fleeting moment, Sarah thought she heard it. Sarah's voice calling her name, so faint she almost convinced herself it was just the wind. But the coldness in the air told a different story. The spirits weren't gone. They were still here, trapped within the walls of the house, their cries lingering in the space between life and death. Ben stopped abruptly, turning to face the group with wide, haunted eyes. "We're not going to make it out, are we?" The question hung in the air, unresolved. The group continued moving forward, but the uncertainty in Ben's voice mirrored the thoughts running through each of their minds. Were they truly free of the house's curse? Or had they simply traded one form of torment for another? Had Sarah's sacrifice truly severed the tie between the house and the spirits? Or had she simply delayed their torment? A distant rumble, like thunder, echoed through the halls. The storm outside had long passed, but now the house seemed to be alive, resonating with the same energy that had trapped the spirits for so long. Suddenly, the walls around them shifted. One moment they were walking down a hallway. The next they were in an entirely different room. The walls stretched and expanded, doors appearing where there had been none before, and with every turn they made, the house seemed to pull them deeper, into its twisted labyrinth. "We have to break through," Mark said, his voice urgent. "If we keep going in circles, we'll never get out." "Keep moving," Ben ordered, his face tight with determination. "We can't stop now. We need to leave." But the house didn't let them leave so easily. With a sudden crash, the floor beneath them buckled, and the ground gave way. The floor collapses beneath them, sending the group tumbling into the darkness. The walls groan, and the house seems to be fighting back, dragging them deeper into its nightmarish core. Was Sarah's sacrifice truly enough to break the curse, or has the house found a way to reclaim them all? The world around them seemed to collapse, or at least it felt that way. The floorboards cracked, giving way to a yawning void beneath their feet. Sarah, Ben, Olivia, and Mark fell through the darkness, their bodies flailing in every direction. For a brief moment, everything felt weightless, as if they were floating in a void that had no beginning and no end. Then, with a sickening thud, they hit the ground. Dust filled the air as they scrambled to their feet, each of them gasping for breath. The room they found themselves in was unfamiliar. A vast, dimly lit chamber with jagged stone walls and a high, arching ceiling. The air smelled damp and musty, thick with the stench of decay. The room was unnaturally cold, and the floor was slick beneath their feet, as though water had begun to seep from the cracks in the walls. Ben groaned, shaking his head as he tried to stand. What the hell just happened? He rubbed his head, trying to make sense of the fall. Where are we? Olivia stood up more slowly, her eyes darting around the room, her face pale with fear. This isn't the same place. It feels different, but I can't tell what's... Her voice trailed off as she turned toward the far side of the room, where a narrow corridor led deeper into the house. The shadows seemed to pulse there, as if something was waiting in the dark. Mark had already taken a step forward, the weight of his breath quickening in his chest. We need to get out of here. The house isn't done with us. It wants us. And if we don't act fast, it'll keep us trapped here forever. I think you're right, Sarah said, her voice cold and determined. She could feel the house closing in on them, its walls seemingly shifting and bending as they stood in the center of the chamber. She took a deep breath. We need to find a way out. Now. They started moving toward the corridor, but the shadows around them seemed to shift, closing in like a web. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the air itself was pulling them. Back! Don't go down that hallway, Olivia warned, her voice trembling. It's not real. The house is trying to lead us somewhere we don't want to go. The shadows around them thickened as the very walls of the house seemed to pulse with an ominous rhythm. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw something. In the dark, a faint silhouette of someone moving toward them. Do you see that? She whispered. Ben and Mark both turned to look, but by the time their eyes focused, the figure was gone. It's just the shadows, Mark muttered, but his voice betrayed him. The doubt was in his tone. The fear was already creeping in. We need to keep moving, Sarah urged. The longer we stay, the more the house will drag us in. But the house wasn't done yet. Without warning, the walls groaned, and the corridor ahead began to stretch longer, bending in ways that defied reason. The walls warped like rubber, the arches twisting and buckling as if they were alive. The passageway seemed endless now, like an eternal labyrinth, pulling them further into its dark heart. No, Olivia gasped, her voice cracking. It's shifting again. The house is rearranging itself. Ben clenched his fists. It's trying to keep us in. It won't let us go. The house wasn't just trapping them. It was becoming something else. Sarah could feel it now, the oppressive weight pressing in on them. The very air felt heavy, thick with dark energy. The house was feeding off their fear, their panic, twisting their perceptions of reality, and then the whispers returned. At first they were soft, almost inaudible. But as they grew louder, they became distinct voices, pleading, crying out in desperation. The words were incoherent at first, a cacophony of tortured souls begging for release. But then one voice rose above the others. It was clear, loud, and unmistakable. Help me. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Sarah, Olivia whispered, her eyes wide in horror. That's your voice. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. No, it can't be. But the voice continued to call out to her, its tone filled with anguish and torment. Help me, Sarah. Help me, Sarah. It's not real, Mark said quickly, his eyes darting around the room, his voice rising in panic. It's the house. It's manipulating us. We have to stay focused. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was real, that somehow her sacrifice hadn't been enough, that something was still lingering in the house, still calling her, still trying to pull her back into its dark, suffocating grip. We need to keep moving, she said, her voice stronger now, though her insides were filled with doubt. She turned to Ben and Olivia. We have to find a way out, before it's too late. They nodded, and together they pressed forward, the passageway seeming to stretch endlessly before them. But the shadows weren't done with them. As they walked, the walls began to ripple, the very floor beneath their feet warping. It felt like they were walking through an endless tunnel, and with every step, the house itself seemed to be closing in. It was as if the entire structure was alive with the spirits of the dead and the curse that bound them to the land. And then, just when it seemed like there was no way forward, they reached the end of the corridor. There, standing in the darkness, was a door. The door was different from any they had seen before. It was old, wrought iron, with intricate carvings and symbols they couldn't decipher. The door had a strange, magnetic pull to it, like it was beckoning them to come closer. "It's the way out," Olivia whispered. But there was doubt in her voice, uncertainty. The whispers had grown louder now, frantic and pleading. The door pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its surface shimmering as if alive. Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Ben's face filled with equal parts fear and determination. "We're almost there," he said. "This is it. This is the way out." But as they moved closer, Sarah's stomach twisted with dread. She felt the house's grip tighten. It wasn't going to let them go that easily. As the group approaches the door, the shadows close in faster, their forms writhing and contorting. The house begins to scream, the walls buckling as if it's fighting to hold them in. Will they be able to escape, or will the house consume them once and for all? The door loomed ahead, an ominous threshold between the group and whatever hope they had left. The whispers that had been haunting them were now deafening, swirling through the room like a hurricane. The dark, writhing shapes in the corners of the room seemed to close in, their forms growing larger, more tangible, as if the house itself was pushing them toward their final confrontation. Sarah's breath quickened, and for a moment, her body froze in place. The door felt like it was pulling her in, its intricate ironwork almost alive, its cold surface pulsing with an unnatural energy. It beckoned, promising an escape, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was also a trap, a way for the house to claim them all. "Are you sure about this?" Mark's voice was shaky, filled with doubt as he glanced at Sarah. "Are we really going to just open this door?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered, her voice strained, almost as if speaking aloud would trigger the house to consume them whole. "It feels like we're walking into something worse, but we can't stay here." Ben stepped forward, his face hard with determination. "We've come too far to turn back now. We have to open it. We have to trust that this is the way out." The whispers grew louder, as if the house was speaking to them now. The voices calling to Sarah from within the walls twisted, shifted. Some sounded like Sarah, others were indistinguishable, but they all seemed to speak with a sense of pleading. "Sarah," they whispered. "Help me." No, Sarah thought. That isn't me. That's the house, playing with my mind. But even as she thought this, she felt the cold chill of doubt creeping into her heart. The voices, her voice, echoed through her, and a painful flash of guilt pierced her chest. Sarah had sacrificed herself to destroy the heart of the curse. Had it truly worked? Or had her sacrifice merely delayed the inevitable? Were these the spirits of the trapped souls, or was it something else? "Sarah," the voice called again, louder this time. "I'm still here. Please, I need you." Her heart skipped a beat. It was unmistakable. It was her voice, her real voice. "No," Sarah gasped, stepping back from the door. "No, no, no!" Mark rushed to her side, his face filled with concern. "What's wrong?" Sarah's pulse raced. "It's my voice. It's calling me." Ben's eyes widened with realization. "Is it you? Are you still inside the house?" "No," Olivia said softly, her eyes focused on Sarah with empathy. "It's not you calling. It's the house. It's trying to manipulate you." But despite Olivia's words, Sarah felt her mind begin to slip, her resolve cracking. The guilt, the torment, the unfinished business. It felt like the house was pulling at the very core of her being. Was she truly free? Or was she still connected to this place, bound by the curse, the same way the spirits had been? I am here. I am still here. The voice grew louder, and with it the weight of the house pressed harder on her chest. It was her voice, but it was warped, twisted by the curse. She could feel it. It was calling her to stay, to return. "No," Sarah whispered fiercely, shaking her head. "This isn't real. This isn't me." She could feel the weight of the house pressing on her soul, a suffocating force. And yet, she couldn't let go of the thought. What if Sarah wasn't truly gone? What if she hadn't severed the connection completely? Ben stepped closer, grabbing her by the shoulder. "Sarah, don't listen to it. You know this isn't you. You know the house is lying." The walls groaned, an almost pained sound, as if the house itself were groaning with frustration. The door before them shook violently, its iron hinges rattling, the cold metal glowing as if the house itself was alive. The shadows around them seemed to curl tighter, their presence growing darker, thicker, and more oppressive. "I have to," Sarah whispered. Her voice cracked, the weight of her decision tearing at her insides. She could hear the pleading cries, but they felt far away now, as if they were no longer calling to her, but calling for something more. "I have to go." Olivia grabbed her arm urgently. "No, Sarah, don't let the house win. The sacrifice, the curse, it's broken. The spirits, your voice, it's all trying to deceive you. The house is feeding on your doubt. You can't let it pull you back." For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, torn between the reality she was experiencing and the overwhelming weight of the house's influence. She could feel the spirits, Sarah's spirit, fighting for release, yet it was not her calling out to her anymore. It was the house, twisting her memories, twisting her sacrifice. Sarah took a deep breath, shaking off the pull of the voices. With trembling hands, she reached for the door handle. The moment her fingers made contact with the cold iron, the house seemed to scream, a deafening, horrible sound that rattled her very soul. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice strong, resolute. "I will not let this place consume me. I am free." She turned the handle and pushed the door open. As the door creaked open, an overwhelming rush of cold air slammed into them. The room on the other side was shrouded in darkness, but there was something different about it. The air felt clearer, less oppressive, but there was a sense of dread that washed over them as they stepped across the threshold. Was this the escape they had been hoping for? Or was this the house's final trick, drawing them into another trap? The door creaked open, but as they stepped through, a strange weight seemed to lift from their shoulders. For a moment, the oppressive darkness and the crushing pressure of the house's grip seemed to recede, replaced by an eerie stillness that was, for once, peaceful. The air was cleaner, fresher, as if they had left the suffocating shadows of the lodge behind them. Sarah, Ben, Olivia, and Mark stood together in the doorway, uncertain whether to move forward. Beyond the door, the room stretched out in front of them, a long, narrow hall, dimly lit by flickering ancient sconces. It didn't feel like a traditional room. There was an unsettling quality to the space, as though it didn't belong to the same house they had spent so long in. The walls of the hall were lined with tall, narrow windows. The light outside seemed muted, like dusk was falling, though the storm from earlier was now completely gone. There was no rain, no wind, only an uncomfortable silence. Ben was the first to break it. "Is this really it? Are we out?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered, her eyes scanning the hallway. The air, though fresh, still carried a strange, dissonant hum, like something was not quite right. "This place doesn't feel like the house. It's almost Empty. Empty, Mark echoed, his voice filled with uncertainty. It feels like we're walking into something else, something more. Olivia's expression was drawn tight with suspicion. She looked down the hallway where the light seemed to fade into an impenetrable shadow. We need to move quickly. This place might be a trick. As the group stepped further into the hallway, the shadows seemed to stretch behind them, almost alive, reaching toward them. The sensation of being watched, the oppressive, suffocating force they had felt in the lodge, hadn't completely disappeared. It lingered in the corners of their minds, a distant presence that made it hard to breathe, even in this strange new space. They continued forward, passing the tall windows. Outside, the world was a misty landscape, the horizon blurred and uncertain. There were no roads, no signs of life, just an endless winding path through a desolate, fog-covered world. The further they walked, the more disconnected they felt from reality. It was as if the world outside no longer made sense. "I don't like this," Mark muttered, his voice barely audible. "We've seen enough of this house's tricks. How do we know this isn't just another part of the curse?" "I don't think it is," Sarah said softly, her eyes fixed on a growing shape in the distance. It seemed like a doorway at first, but as they approached, the shape started to shift and change, like a ripple across the air. The edges of the doorway seemed to blur, as though it existed in more than one place at once. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. It's not real, this isn't real. But as they drew closer, Sarah felt an overwhelming pull, an undeniable force that drew her toward the doorway. Her chest tightened as she glanced over at Olivia. "What if this is the way out?" "It's the only way forward," Ben said, his voice strained. "We have to know for sure." The doorway flickered again, and Sarah stepped closer, each movement feeling heavier, like the ground beneath her feet was pulling her in. The doorframe shimmered and rippled as if the boundary between worlds was thinning, and for the briefest moment she thought she saw something. A fleeting figure, a shadow. That looked all too familiar. "Sarah." The voice stopped her dead in her tracks. "Sarah, it's me." Her breath caught. The voice was hers. Her real voice, not the twisted, haunted echo she had heard in the house, but a familiar, gentle tone. Her heart raced. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's not real. It's not you." But the voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, help me." It was Sarah's voice, but it was more than that. It was a version of herself, trapped, broken, distorted. She stepped closer to the doorway, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the sound, the voice that called to her. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing the air in front of her. "Sarah, you have to come through. I'm waiting for you." "No," Sarah gasped, stepping back. The voice had called to her, had whispered from beyond, but now the tone had shifted. It wasn't calling her, it was begging her to come back. She felt it now, the tether that connected her to the house, to the curse that had once bound her soul. The air around her pulsed with energy, and for the first time, she felt it. The house was still trying to claim her. "We have to go," Olivia cried out, her face contorted with fear. She grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back. "It's a trap! Don't listen to it!" For a moment, Sarah couldn't move. The voice had pierced through her, rattling her resolve. But the touch of Olivia's hand grounded her, bringing her back to reality. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head, her voice trembling. "I'm not going back." But the moment she made that decision, the house seemed to react violently. The walls around them began to tremble, the ground shaking beneath their feet. A sound like the earth cracking open filled the air, followed by a long, low growl that seemed to come from the very core of the house. The shadowy figures that had been lurking in the distance started to shift and converge toward them. You cannot leave. It was the entity. It was the house itself. The doorway before them seemed to buckle and collapse in on itself, folding like paper, the edges of reality bending and warping as though they were being pulled into a different dimension. The spirits, Sarah realized, weren't just trapped within the house. They were part of it, feeding off its power, feeding off the living. The house was alive. The house, desperate to keep them from escaping, rages against them. The boundary between worlds begins to collapse, and the doorway to freedom seems to dissolve into nothing. The spirit's cries intensify, and Sarah must face the horrifying truth. Escaping this place may cost them everything. The house rumbled beneath their feet, its walls groaning and twisting as though it were alive. A living, breathing entity that was desperately trying to pull them back into its dark embrace. The doorway that had seemed like an escape moment, before now writhed in unnatural shapes, the edges flickering like the faintest smoke as the walls around them rippled. "No! We're so close!" Ben shouted, his voice strained with panic. "We can't let it win," Olivia breathed, her eyes wild with terror. "We have to keep moving. If we stand here, it will trap us. All of us." Sarah's mind raced as she took in the collapsing doorway, the house's growing presence surrounding them. The voice that had called to her, the distorted version of herself, still echoed in the back of her mind. It wanted her to stay. It wanted her to surrender. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Sarah stepped forward, taking a deep breath as she focused on the goal in front of her. The doorway was no longer an invitation. It was an obstacle. The house itself had turned the threshold into a trap. But there had to be another way. They had come this far. They couldn't turn back now. "I won't let this place take me," Sarah said through clenched teeth, her voice resolute. "I'm not going back, I'm not!" Mark grabbed her arm, his grip tight, his face pale with fear. "Sarah, we don't have much time. If we don't get out of here soon, the house will take us. You know that." "I know," Sarah said, her voice trembling but fierce. "But I need to do this. We need to fight back. We can't just walk away like we're helpless." Olivia turned to face them, her eyes filled with determination, but also a deep sadness. "The house is trying to break us. It's feeding on our fear, on our doubts. We need to confront it. All of it. We've been running from it for too long." As they stood there, the walls of the hallway continued to twist and distort, and the shadows in the corners of the room grew more restless. The low growl of the house intensified, the floor trembling beneath their feet as though the building itself was alive, fighting to keep them trapped inside. Suddenly, the door before them pulsed with an unnatural force, a surge of dark energy. The very air around them grew thick, as though something was clawing at the fabric of reality itself. Sarah felt her chest tighten, the house's cold grip sinking into her bones. She could feel the entity now just behind them, watching, waiting. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice reverberating through the walls. "You are mine. You always have been." Sarah's heart raced, but she held her ground. She refused to let fear consume her now, not when they were so close to breaking free. This is it. The final stand. The air around them crackled, charged with dark energy. Sarah could feel the heat of it, like the very walls were closing in on them, squeezing the life from the room. The house was trying to trap them again, to pull them deeper into its grasp. "Olivia!" Sarah shouted. "We need to end this, now!" Olivia turned to face the group, her eyes wide, filled with determination. She was the one who had sensed the power of the spirits all along, the one who had understood the dark pull of the house. Now, she seemed to be gathering every last ounce of energy she had left. "I know," she said. "We need to finish what we started. We have one chance left." The ground beneath their feet shuddered violently, and the entire house seemed to scream in rage as the group neared the threshold of freedom. The air grew thick with dark energy, suffocating and heavy, like the very house itself was fighting against their escape. The doorway, once a hopeful passage to safety, now seemed to warp and twist before them, its edges buckling as though reality itself was bending under the weight of the entity's wrath. Sarah could feel it. The house was alive, and it was desperate. The shadows that had followed them, the voices that had plagued them, were now converging into one singular presence, a force so powerful that the very walls trembled in response. The entity, the source of the curse, was angry, and it was not ready to let them leave. "It's not over," Olivia gasped, her voice filled with dread. "The house is fighting us. It's not just a building. It's alive, and it's not going to let us go." Ben took a step back, his face pale, his breath shallow. "I don't care what it takes. We're not staying here. We're getting out, together." Mark's hands shook as he looked at the door, the only path left to freedom. "We've been through hell. We're not going back." The house seemed to shudder in response, and the door flickered with dark energy trying to close. The shadowy figures that had plagued them throughout the journey now seemed to coalesce in the doorway, reaching hands, faces twisted with agony, and rage, trying to pull the group back into the suffocating darkness. But Sarah wasn't ready to give in. Not after everything they had been through. She stepped forward, a determined fire burning in her chest, and reached for the door. The moment her hand touched the frame, the walls shook violently, the temperature dropping to an unbearable chill. The shadows wrapped around her, whispering her name, tugging at her with unseen hands, but she didn't let go. "No!" The house seemed to scream. The dark presence of the entity echoed in her mind, its voice filled with venom. "You cannot leave. You belong to me." A blast of freezing cold air slammed into her, knocking her off her feet, but Sarah quickly regained her balance. She could feel it now, the power of the curse still thrumming in the walls, in the very foundation of the house. She knew what had to be done. They couldn't leave without ending it, for good. The house, the spirits, the entity, it all had to be destroyed. "Olivia," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that coiled in her stomach. "We need to break the last of it. The house is feeding off our fear. It wants us to doubt. We have to end this." Olivia's eyes widened with understanding. "We can end it, together." They had to sever the connection, destroy the heart of the curse once and for all. But it wouldn't be easy. The house was trying to pull them back into the nightmare, wrapping its walls around them like chains. "We have to confront it," Olivia continued. "We have to face the entity, the source of this curse, head on." The room around them shuddered violently. The house, the cursed entity that had tormented them, was not ready to let go. The air crackled with dark energy as the group moved forward, knowing they had to face the source of their torment one last time. This wasn't just the entity they had seen before. This was the core of the curse itself. It was the manifestation of all their fears, all their regrets. The final confrontation. As Sarah stepped forward, she could feel the weight of the house's lingering presence. Every part of the structure seemed to fight back against them. The walls creaked and groaned. The air turned thick with suffocating darkness. The shadows stretched out, distorting the room in a way that made it feel alive, like it was breathing, like it could consume them whole at any moment. "I'm not going back," Sarah said, her voice steady though her body trembled. "We've come too far." She looked over at Ben, Olivia, and Mark. They were all equally resolute. But there was something else in their eyes. Fear, yes, but also recognition. They knew what was coming. They knew that the curse, the entity, wasn't just a physical force. It was an emotional one. It had taken root in their hearts and minds. It had twisted their very souls. And now, it was time to face it head on. In that moment, the entity revealed itself fully, a twisting, flickering shape that shifted from human to monstrous, its form ever-changing. It was the embodiment of all their suffering, their trauma. The entity's face was their own, distorted, stretched, a cruel mockery of their memories. It wore their fears like a skin, their guilt, their pain, their shame. It was all of them, and yet none of them. "You cannot escape," the entity hissed, its voice a chorus of 1,000 twisted whispers. "You belong to me, you always have." Sarah felt a sudden tightness in her chest. The words cut deep. She had faced this force before, but now it was real. The truth. The curse didn't just feed on them physically, it had been feeding on their souls, on their memories. It had planted itself in their hearts, and they were bound to it in a way they hadn't fully realized until now. Olivia stepped forward, her eyes burning with fierce determination. "You don't control us anymore, we won't let you," the entity hissed, its form distorting in a flash of dark energy, a ripple through the fabric of reality. "You cannot defeat me. I am not just the house. I am your guilt, your fear, your memories. I am you, and you cannot escape yourself." For a moment, it felt like everything inside Sarah was going to collapse. The house had been a prison. The curse had been a physical thing. But this realization, it was even darker. The entity had been feeding off their own internal struggles. And as much as they fought the house's power, they hadn't fully fought the parts of themselves that had been corrupted. "You can't escape," it whispered again. "I am the fear you've never faced." In that moment, Sarah knew what had to happen. They had to stop running. They had to face the fear, the darkness inside them. They had to confront themselves. She tightened her grip on the silver knife. In her hand, the weapon that had become a symbol of their defiance. The house had never just been an external threat. It had been inside them all along, and the only way to break the curse once and for all was to sever the connection to that fear, those memories. Sarah turned to the group. "We can't fight this by running. We have to face it, together. We need to accept it, or it will destroy us." Ben looked at her, his face strained with doubt. But Sarah saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. They had already faced physical horrors. Now they had to face their emotional and psychological ones. "I'm ready," Olivia said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered. "Let's do this." Mark nodded, his usual skepticism now replaced with a quiet resolve. "We've been through worse. This is the last step." The entity screeched in frustration, its form flickering with dark energy. It didn't want them to face the truth. It wanted them to remain trapped in the cycle. But the group stood united, ready to fight not just for their freedom, but for their peace. With a single, synchronized movement, they stepped forward. The doorway before them, once a swirling portal to the unknown, filled with shadows and oppressive darkness, was now simply a passage, a silent, open exit. The oppressive air that had clung to the house seemed to have evaporated, leaving a lingering silence behind. For a brief moment, it felt like they had won. The shadows no longer clawed at their backs. The house was no longer alive with its constant gnawing presence. But as they stood on the threshold of escape, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Sarah stepped forward, her heart racing in her chest as she peered into the doorway, the world outside so close, so real. The once overwhelming weight of the house seemed to lift, but the uncertainty of the unknown remained. "Is it really over?" she whispered. The silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken questions, until Ben spoke. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice low and unsure. "But I can't keep living in that place. Not anymore. We've fought too hard to give up now." Sarah nodded. But even as she took another step toward the door, she felt an icy chill crawl up her spine. It wasn't just the cold that lingered in the room. It was the feeling that something wasn't right, that even though they had destroyed the entity, they were still tethered to the house in some way. The very air seemed to vibrate with the faintest ghostly hum, a presence that hadn't fully dissipated. Olivia's hand rested on Sarah's shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding. We've survived. We have to believe that's enough. Sarah glanced at her, and for a brief second, Olivia's eyes flashed with something unreadable, something buried deep within. It was more than fear. It was uncertainty, a sense of loss that none of them had been able to express in the chaos of their survival. Olivia had felt the presence of the spirits more than anyone, and something in her eyes told Sarah that the sacrifice they'd made, the horror they'd experienced, hadn't fully been resolved. There were things left unsaid, unsolved. "I want to believe that," Sarah said quietly, but doubt lingered in her voice. Mark, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke up, his voice tight. "You know, this could all be a trick. What if the house is just letting us think we've won? What if this is part of the curse, just another twist to keep us here? We've been deceived before." His words struck a chord with Sarah, and she took a deep breath. Could it really be true? Had they truly broken the curse? Or was there something darker still pulling them in? The house had changed so much over time. It had been a living, breathing entity, an entity tied to their very souls. They had fought so hard to break free, but now that they were on the verge of stepping out, she couldn't shake the fear that the house still had a hold on them. The house's grip wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. Could the darkness still follow them into the world outside? Ben turned to Sarah, his face clouded with his own uncertainty. "I know we're all tired. I know we've been through hell. But what if this isn't it? What if we have to do something else? What if there's one final step we have to take?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, feeling the weight of the decision. She had given everything to escape this place, and yet standing on the precipice of freedom, she felt the invisible tug, like a thread still connecting her to the house. I need to know it's really over. I can't leave if there's still a chance that this place is still holding." And the ground beneath them seemed to hum again, the faintest tremor in the floor. The door, wide open, beckoned them forward. But the longer they hesitated, the more it felt like they were on the edge of a cliff, unsure of whether the ground would hold. "I'm scared," Olivia said softly, her voice filled with a quiet, vulnerable honesty that made Sarah's chest ache. "What if this place never lets go of us? What if we leave and the darkness follows us? What if it's not just the house, it's us, the spirits, the curse? They live inside us now, they're a part of us." For a moment the group fell silent, the weight of Olivia's words settling on them like a fog. The house had already claimed so much, so many lives. Had they truly freed themselves from it? Or was it a part of them now, inescapable? "We have to choose," Sarah said, her voice steady, but it carried the weight of every decision they'd made in the past days. "Either we step through this door, leave this place behind, and trust that we've truly escaped, or we face whatever's left of the curse." Mark took a deep breath, his voice tight but resolute. "We can't keep running. We have to take control of our own fate. We can't live in fear forever. We've earned the right to walk out of this hellhole." Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of the final choice pressing on her. Her hand reached out toward the doorway, her heart pounding as she took in the world outside, the world she had fought so hard to get back to. The dark, twisted entity that had haunted them, the curse that had claimed Sarah's soul. It all seemed to melt away with each step. She reached the doorway, And then, just as she was about to cross the threshold, she stopped. The presence that had been lingering in the air, the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right, pressed against her with a force so strong it made her knees feel weak. The doorway flickered again, its edges distorting. It wasn't a clear path to freedom. It was still alive, and then the whisper came again, this time clearer than before. Sarah. Her heart stopped. It was her voice, but not the version that had been warped by the house. It was her, the real her, calling from beyond. Her breath caught in her throat. No, it can't be. The house wasn't just calling her anymore. It was pulling her in, trying to drag her back. The others had already crossed the threshold, but Sarah was frozen in place. The house calls to Sarah one last time. Will she leave, finally freed from its grip? Or will the darkness claim her once again, pulling her back into the house's endless nightmare? The whispering voice echoed in Sarah's mind, loud and clear, like a pulse that thrummed in her ears. It was her voice, but distorted, broken, tortured. The house was calling her back, the final tug on her soul. The warmth of the outside world, the world she had fought for, had sacrificed for, was now tainted by this last lingering pull. The doorway stood before her, a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive force that beckoned from behind. Sarah. She could feel it now, deep in her chest, this invisible force trying to reel her in, like a string tethering her to the house. The door to freedom, to escape, felt impossibly distant now, almost out of reach. I have to go, Sarah whispered to herself, but even as she said the words, doubt slithered in her mind. Her body was still frozen in place, unwilling to take the final step away from the house that had haunted her for so long. Behind her, she could feel the group's gaze, Ben, Olivia, and Mark, all of them standing just outside the doorway, waiting. Their faces a mixture of hope, fear, and uncertainty. They had made it this far. They had fought with her. They had bled and struggled and broken through every wall, every supernatural force the house threw at them. But now, they couldn't go any further without her. Sarah, Mark said, his voice breaking the silence. Don't listen to. You've already fought so much. We have fought. You're free. You've given everything. Sarah didn't turn around, but she felt his presence. She could feel Ben's quiet support, Olivia's silent empathy. But even through their words, the house's pull was undeniable. It had broken her, just as it had broken the others. She had already sacrificed so much. Could she really leave it behind? Could she let go of everything she had given to this place and trust that the door before her was truly an escape? Or could she, face the house one last time and end it completely? Please, Sarah, Olivia said softly, her voice filled with quiet urgency. We can't leave you behind. The house has already taken so much. Don't let it take you too. It was in that moment, the quiet, suffocating moment of decision, that Sarah felt something shift within her. The house was trying to drag her back into its grip, but it wasn't just pulling her physically. It was pulling at the very essence of her, at her memories, her fears. The part of her that had been scarred by everything she had seen and done in this cursed place. But she was not broken. Not anymore. She had come here to survive. And now she needed to take that final step. It ends here. Taking a deep breath, Sarah turned slowly, her face set with determination. The voice calling her voice, was still there. But now it sounded distant, weaker. She had made her choice. This is it, she said, her voice strong. I'm not going back. I won't let this place take me again. The shadows in the room flickered, and the house seemed to pulse with a final violent tremor. But Sarah stepped forward, the final resolute step toward freedom. The doorway ahead of her wasn't just a path to the outside world. It was her rebirth, her release from the chains that had bound her to the house for so long. But as she stepped through the doorway, the final remnants of the house's grip came rushing forward. The shadows stretched toward her, closing in like dark claws. "No!" The house roared, its voice shaking the very walls. The air became thick with a suffocating pressure, the doorway flickering, warping, like the house was trying to seal itself shut, trapping them all inside once more. But this time, Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm done," she said aloud, her voice steady and clear. "We're done." And with that, she lunged forward, pulling Ben, Olivia, and Mark through the doorway with her. For a moment, everything went dark. The world around them seemed to shudder violently. Time itself stretched, and then silence. Sarah and the group are through the door, but the world on the other side isn't what they expected. The silence is deafening, and the air feels wrong. The doorway that once led them out now seems distant, like a thin thread connecting them to something else. Have they truly escaped the house, or are they now trapped in an even darker reality? And what price did Sarah pay for breaking the curse? The world beyond the door was not what they had expected. The moment Sarah, Ben, Olivia, and Mark stepped through, the atmosphere changed. The oppressive, suffocating weight of the house, the cursed presence they had felt for so long, seemed to lift, but only for a moment. The air was still, almost too still. There was no wind, no sounds of nature, just an unnerving silence that hung in the air, pressing against their ears. They stood in an empty, dimly lit space. It was an open field, stretching out before them, but there was no sky, no horizon. The earth beneath their feet felt solid, but the world around them seemed distant, as if they were suspended in an endless limbo. Where are we?" Mark whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. He looked around, his eyes scanning the unbroken expanse. There was nothing here, nothing but the strange grey expanse that seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. She took a step forward, her legs trembling beneath her. The landscape was wrong. It wasn't a dream, but it didn't feel like the real world either. The edges of reality seemed to blur. The air had an unnatural stillness to it, and the ground beneath their feet was solid but felt disconnected, like they were walking through an illusion. "We're outside the house," Olivia said quietly, her voice filled with wonder and apprehension. "But this isn't the world we know. Something's off. This isn't real." Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized what Olivia was saying. It was true. The world around them didn't feel right. It was too perfect, too clean, like a distorted reflection of reality. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Did we make it out? Or did we step into something else, something worse? Ben, standing next to her, glanced around with a deep frown. "I don't know. I thought we escaped. But this doesn't feel like the world we knew." The faintest glimmer of something appeared on the horizon, a sliver of movement, but when they turned to look, it vanished. It was as if the world they were standing in wasn't solid, like it was flickering between reality and something else entirely. A low, chilling hum filled the air, starting as a faint vibration beneath their feet and growing louder, a resonating frequency that seemed to shake the very fabric of the world around them. "Something's coming," Olivia whispered, her eyes wide with dread. She could feel it too. The same oppressive energy that had clung to the house was here, in this place. "We need to move," Sarah urged, her heart racing. But as she took a step forward, the world shifted, the ground beneath their feet rippling, like the very reality was bending. A wave of nausea hit Sarah's stomach, and she staggered, gripping Ben's arm to steady herself. "What's happening?" Mark shouted, his voice rising in panic. The air seemed to distort in front of them, warping like a mirage. The sky above them, if it could even be called a sky, flickered, like the image of a fractured painting. And then, from the distortion, a shadow emerged. It wasn't the entity from the house. No, this was something different. Something even more terrifying. The shadow was tall, humanoid in form, but its edges were jagged, its features undefined, as if it were formed from the very fabric of this distorted world. Its eyes glowed an unnatural, ghostly blue, and its body flickered like static, as though it was both here and not here at once. It was an aberration, a creature born of something darker than the house itself. You shouldn't have come here. The voice was a whisper, but it echoed through their minds, freezing them in place. The voice wasn't speaking aloud, it was inside them, inside their very thoughts. It was like an echo from the deepest part of their fears, their minds, all of their most buried doubts. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling but defiant. "I am the thing between worlds," the shadow said. "I am the gatekeeper, the limbo between the house and your world. You cannot leave here. You have entered my domain." Ben took a step back, fear evident in his eyes. We left the house. We were free. We made it out." The shadow flickered. Again, its blue eyes burning brighter. "You think you escaped? No. You merely shifted from one prison to another. The curse has not been broken. It was merely transferred." "No." Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. You mean we're still trapped? This is just another part of the house." The shadow tilted its head slightly, as if amused. "You may call it a house, but it is much more. It is a prison of the soul. The real curse is not the house. It is the trauma, the fear, the emotions that you brought with you. And now, you are mine." Suddenly, the world began to shudder. The ground cracked beneath them, and the shadows in the distance began to grow, rising up in terrifying formations. Figures emerged from the cracks, their forms indistinct, but their presence overwhelming. Spirits, lost souls, all trapped in this otherworldly prison. They were the remnants of the house, the ones who had never escaped, the ones whose torment was eternal. "We can't leave," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "We can't escape. Not from the curse, not from this. The group is trapped in a world that exists between realities, a twisted liminal space pulled into the grip of the house's true curse." The shadow figure reveals the horrifying truth: they are not free. They have only moved from one form of torment to another. The curse has not been lifted. Will the group be able to break free from this new, unseen prison? Or will they be lost forever in this purgatorial void? The shadow figure, the gatekeeper, stood before them, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness, watching them with cold detachment. The figure's voice had faded, but the echo of its words reverberated in Sarah's mind, each one sending a cold ripple of dread down her spine. The curse has not been broken. It was merely transferred. Their escape had been an illusion. They had thought they had left the house behind, but in truth, they had only shifted into another dimension, a place between worlds, a limbo where the horrors they had faced would never truly leave them. The shadows around them grew darker, the world itself bending as if reacting to the entity's power. The landscape that had once seemed open and endless now felt like an enclosed space, a box with no way out. The ground was cracked, like the fabric of the universe itself was tearing apart, and the whispers of the lost souls that had once inhabited the house now filled the air, their voices overlapping, their cries of anguish growing louder with each passing moment. "Sarah, please, help me." The voice called again, faint but still unmistakable. It was her voice, the voice that had haunted her since the beginning. "No," she whispered. her throat tight with emotion. "I'm not listening to you." But even as she spoke, the pull was there again. The invisible thread tying her to the house, to the cursed place. It wasn't just the house. It was the trauma of everything they had experienced. The fear, the guilt, the loss. "Sarah, don't listen to it," Olivia said urgently, her voice filled with fear and determination. "It's not you. It's the curse. The house is feeding off of us, off our doubts and regrets." Sarah clenched her fists, trying to shake off the voices. "I know it's not me. But how do we get out of this place? How do we stop it?" The shadow figure's voice returned, chilling and slow. "You cannot leave. You never will. The curse lives in you. It is you now." The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if reacting to the figure's words. The air thickened and the temperature dropped. The shadows around them grew more solid, more real. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, faces twisted with agony, hands reaching out toward them. Spirits, lost souls who had never escaped the curse, now forever trapped in this limbo. And with each passing moment, they seemed to grow stronger, more tangible. "We need to fight it," Ben said, his voice low but resolute. "We can't let it drag us back into the darkness. We've come too far." Mark nodded, but his face was pale, his body tense with fear. "But how? We don't know where we are, and we don't even know if this place is real." Olivia's face was filled with quiet understanding. "It's not just a place. It's a reflection, a mirror of everything we've been through. It's a prison for the soul, not just a building. The house, it's been feeding off us the entire time, off our trauma, our fear, our memories." Sarah turned to her, her heart heavy with the realization. "So what now? What do we do? How do we break free?" Olivia stepped forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "We have to face it. We've been running from the curse, from the house, from our own fears. But now we have to face them. We have to face the memories and the pain. We have to break the curse for good." She looked around, taking in the spectral figures that filled the void around them. "The curse won't release us until we confront everything we've been through. We need to stop running and accept what's happened. Only then can we finally break free." The shadow figure loomed closer, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. "You cannot escape. The darkness lives in you now. You cannot break free. You belong to me." Sarah felt her heart race again. The pressure was building. The voices of the spirits, their tortured cries, were growing louder, overlapping in a dizzying cacophony. "You're wrong," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I'm not afraid anymore." The figure paused, and the spirits surrounding them fell silent, their gaze fixed on Sarah. She took a deep breath, standing tall in the face of the fear and the darkness that had once consumed her. "This is the moment," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We've been through hell, but we're not going to let it take us. I'm ready to face it." The air around them shimmered, and for a brief moment, the shadows began to pull back. The house, the curse, was reacting. It didn't want them to confront it. It didn't want them to break free. "We're not your prisoners anymore," Olivia said, her voice filled with quiet power. "We're breaking the cycle. It ends now." The ground shook, the walls of the limbo space warping, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. The shadow figure hissed, its form twisting violently, its power fighting back against their words. "No!" it screeched. "You belong to me." But Sarah stood firm, her body trembling, but her mind clear. "No, we belong to each other, and we're free." With that, the group stepped forward, each of them facing the darkness. The spirits that had been trapped for so long seemed to pull back, their wails fading as the shadow figure writhed in agony. The house, the curse, the trauma. It was all coming to an end. The limbo space shudders violently as Sarah and the group face the final confrontation with the house's curse. The shadow figure is disintegrating, but at what cost? The doorway to freedom is still ahead, but it's not clear if the group will make it through or if the house will drag them back into the nightmare one last time. The world around them was collapsing. The ground beneath their feet cracked and crumbled, fissures tearing open in the air itself. The house, the curse, the entity that had trapped them for so long, was unraveling, but not without one final, desperate attempt to hold on to them. The space they stood in was no longer the limbo they had come to understand. It was disintegrating, collapsing into a swirling vortex of darkness. The shadow figure, once towering and insidious, was now flickering, its form deteriorating as the house's power weakened. It hissed, its voice fading with each passing second, until all that remained was the whisper of its last words. You cannot escape. You belong to me. But Sarah and the others didn't stop. They had come this far. There was no going back now. We've already escaped, Sarah said, her voice trembling but full of resolve. The shadows around her were dying, their oppressive weight lifting. But the fear still lingered in the back of her mind. She had already sacrificed so much, and now it felt like the hardest part was still to come. She turned to Olivia, Ben, and Mark, who were all standing by her side, their faces filled with the same quiet determination. The weight of the moment had not escaped them. They had fought to survive, and now they had to escape the final remnants of the curse that had clung to them. Are we free? Mark asked, his voice heavy with doubt. He had seen the worst of the house, had felt its grip on his very soul. Even now, he seemed unsure whether the horrors had truly ended. How do we know this isn't another trick? We are free, Olivia said firmly, though the doubt in her eyes betrayed the weight of her own uncertainty. But we have to leave. We have to step away from this place, all of us. The air around them began to hum again, but this time, it wasn't the sound of the house fighting back. It was something else, something benevolent. The limbo space began to tremble, as if responding to Olivia's words, as though the very fabric of reality was starting to break apart. And yet, the spirits that had once tormented them, the trapped souls, now began to fade, their mournful wails disappearing into the ether. I can feel it, Sarah said softly, her heart racing. It's all fading. The curse is losing its hold. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, and the space around them flickered like a dying light on the edge of its life. The door to freedom, the way out, appeared in front of them, shimmering in the collapsing world. But as they began to step forward, Sarah stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She turned to face the shadows, and for the briefest moment, she felt something stir deep within her chest. It wasn't the fear, not anymore. It was something more profound, something like guilt. The shadow figure, now barely recognizable, was crumbling, but its eyes, the same eerie, glowing eyes, locked onto Sarah one last time. You will never escape, the figure whispered, though its voice was barely audible. The curse lives in you. The last remnants of its form began to disintegrate, the figure evaporating like smoke, leaving only its words to linger in the air. Sarah's body stiffened, but she held her ground. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that still clung to her. We're not part of you anymore. The door ahead of them flickered, its edges blurring like the final moments of a dream. And as the house began to fall apart around them, the spirits, those who had been trapped in the house for so long, seemed to lift from the ground, their forms dissipating into the air. They were no longer tethered to the curse, no longer bound to the house. The price of their freedom was the spirit's release. But as Sarah stepped forward, her hand reaching for the door, a final thought crossed her mind. What had they really escaped from? Had the house's grip truly loosened? Or had they merely shifted into another prison, one that would never fully let them go? She pushed the thought aside. They had survived. They had made it this far. "Let's go," she said softly, turning to the others. The door was still open, still waiting. There was no time to question, no time for doubt. One by one, they stepped through. As Sarah crosses the threshold, a surge of energy explodes from the doorframe, briefly blinding them. The world around them spins violently, and they feel themselves falling again, as if the very laws of nature are twisting in on themselves. What awaits them on the other side? Is it truly an escape? Or is this just the beginning of yet another nightmare? The world around them trembled one final time as they stepped through the door. For a moment, everything went black. Then, the sensation of falling took over. A disorienting swirl of colors, like a vortex of light and shadow, rushed past them. There was no ground, no walls, no sky, only the relentless pull of something vast, something powerful. Sarah's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the others beside her, their presence solid in the chaos, but it was impossible to see or hear anything clearly. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the world stopped. A sharp, jarring sensation filled the air. The pressure of the house of the curse was gone. The weight of the house, the dark entity that had plagued them, the spirits who had tormented them. It was all gone. The silence was deafening, but it was different this time. It wasn't the suffocating quiet of the house. It was the peaceful stillness of the world outside, the calm after the storm. Sarah opened her eyes. She was standing on solid ground, the others around her. They were back in the real world, the one she had longed to return to. The air was fresh, the sky overhead was clear, and the sunlight bathed the landscape in warm hues. They were standing in a grassy field, the familiar sounds of the world outside filling the air, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, the wind flowing gently through the trees. They were free. For a moment, no one spoke. They stood there, taking it all in, absorbing the fact that they were no longer trapped in the house, no longer at the mercy of the curse. The nightmare that had plagued them for so long had finally come to an end. But as Sarah looked around, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The world was peaceful, but something wasn't quite right. The air felt too still, too perfect, like the kind of peace that can only come from a hard-won victory, but a peace that doesn't come without a price. A strange sense of unease lingered, like the echo of a distant memory, barely perceptible, but impossible to ignore. "We made it," Ben said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. But even as he said the words, his eyes searched the horizon like he was waiting for something, anything to happen. "I thought we were done," Olivia murmured, looking around, her eyes narrowed as though she could feel the weight of the world lifting, but also hesitating. "I thought we were free." "We are," Sarah said, but her voice trembled. "Aren't we?" But the question hung in the air, unanswered. The silence around them, so heavy, seemed to press down on them, like a final test. Mark, ever the skeptic, stepped forward, his face shadowed with uncertainty. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is real. But what if we've been in another part of the curse this whole time? "We've already faced the curse," Sarah replied, her voice steady, though a pang of doubt twisted in her chest. "We broke it. We won." But still, something felt wrong, something was off. It was as if the curse had been broken, but not entirely. As if there was a final piece, one last question that they hadn't yet answered. "I don't know," Olivia whispered. "It's like I can still feel it. It's faint, but it's still there. The pull." A sudden gust of wind whipped through the field, its force unexpected and unsettling. The air around them thickened, and for a split second Sarah thought she saw a flicker, a shadow, at the edge of her vision. She turned quickly, but it was gone. "No," she muttered under her breath. "No, we're free. This is real. We made it out." But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. "Sarah," Olivia said quietly, her voice tinged with concern, "I know you feel it too." Sarah looked at her, and for a long moment their eyes locked. In that brief instant, she understood. They weren't just free of the house. They had to be free of everything, all of it. The emotional scars, the trauma, the guilt. They couldn't leave it behind so easily. The curse wasn't just a house. It was an emotional prison that had followed them, a part of them they could never truly shake off. And now that they were free, they had to face one final challenge, moving on. Facing the remnants of their own fears and guilt. It wasn't the house that had kept them trapped. It was the memory of it, the curse that had already taken root in their hearts. They had to choose to let go. "I know," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the real world wash over her. "We have to let go." And as she said the words, it was like a weight lifted from her shoulders, a burden she hadn't even realized she had been carrying. The house's hold over her, over them, shattered, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe deeply. The world around them shifted. It wasn't just the field, it was them. The trauma, the fear, the constant reminder of the house. It was gone. The wind settled, and the shadows that had clung to them for so long faded away. The distant whisper of the spirits faded, and with it, the house's curse. They were free. But Sarah knew the final truth. True freedom didn't come from escaping the house. It came from accepting the past and letting it go. The true battle wasn't with the house or the spirits. It was with themselves. And now, for the first time, they could finally live. They had won. Sarah, Ben, Olivia, and Mark stand together in the sunlight, the weight of their ordeal lifting from them. The house is gone. The curse is broken. And though they carry the scars of their past, they are free to move forward, no longer bound by the darkness that once consumed them. The final question is answered. True freedom is found not by escaping, but by accepting and embracing the future.